Hello and welcome everyone to this evening's Four Women, Four Decades conversation. The theme for this evening is thriving relationships. And we realised shortly after putting the title together for this one that it might be mistaken for a conversation about sort of more romantic relationships, but that certainly wasn't our idea. So just to let you in what you're gonna see, we've all got lots to say on this, but this is going to be a conversation about all our relationships and the way we interact with all the people in our lives. We're recording the conversation, as I said a bit earlier, for those that can't make it live. And we have lots to say on this one. We're not experts on relationships. We have our flaws in this, as everyone does, but along our experience and journey, we've all come to see a shift in perspective, I suppose, in terms of how we come to our interactions. So you can expect for us to be sharing a bit around that during this conversation. And the chat is currently closed, but a little bit later in this call, we'll open up the chat and we'll let you know when that happens. And that will be a cue for you to ask any questions that you want to. And we will hopefully get a little bit of time to answer at least some of them later on in the call. And since we were last on one of these free events, we spent a beautiful 4 weeks working with a wonderful group of people on a program around stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. And we've had some just wonderful feedback as a result of that. So if you'd been aware that you maybe hadn't seen us for a while, we've still been busy, but we've been working on a kind of smaller program, which was lovely. So I think we're going to get stuck into this topic. We've got lots to say. And yeah, if I can hand over to you, Rachel, to kick us off.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody again. I'm going to start this evening with some of the conversations we've been having around thriving relationships at work. And it's quite amazing what we've all seen over the past few years, particularly the more we've been reading some of the authors we've been reading, and actually just paying attention to who we know at work, what our relationships are like with those people, what drives some of the emotions and some of the behaviors that we see and feel, and how can we have those relationships become even more effective and useful and fun. So there's a few things I've been noticing, particularly in my work as a coach, but over the last 10 years, the amount of times I work with mostly leaders who will say things like, I couldn't possibly ask for help, because then they'll perceive me to be weak in some way. They, my colleagues, my superiors at work. And I've seen this trend throughout sector, and it happens a lot. It's almost like the higher we go in our careers, the more difficult it seems to become to put our hand up and say, I don't know the answers to this particular problem. So there seems to be a growing need to develop this ability to be vulnerable at work and to really share who we are and how we feel in order to be effective in our roles. And more, as I work with people across many different sectors, I see that doesn't happen as freely as it possibly could. And when I was, there's a few things that happened in my career before I set up on my own, and I worked in a very large financial services organization. And I remember I was late 20s, early 30s, saying to my colleague, oh, there's somebody new at the end of the bank of desks, we should go and say hello. And the person just said, oh no, don't bother, because they'll probably be gone next week. And we didn't even have enough headspace or time to build a relationship with a new person because the turnover was so high in some of these places. And that kind of thing happens a lot as well. So it's almost, where do we invest our energy and where do we spend our time? And so as I've been working with leaders and people at all different levels across all different businesses, what will it take for you to, and for me to turn up to work and say how I feel and to ask for help when I need help? And particularly leaders, this idea that, well, I've taken this job on, so I should know the answer to any question that comes my way. And in a session, I'll often say, well, if you hired a new person into this role, how long would you give them to settle in? How long would you give them to ask any questions? How long would you give them to not know the answers? And the response is typically at least 6 to 12 months, depending on what that role is. But then the expectation we have on ourselves is that the higher I go, the less I'll be willing to put my hand up and say out loud that I don't know. And what that does is, if I work for you and you're not able to do that, you feel unable or uncomfortable to demonstrate that occasionally you don't have the answers, or that you do feel a bit vulnerable in a particular subject matter, I won't then have permission to put my hand up to you and ask you for help. And so the knock-on of this thing is huge. It's almost, well, I will have that permission to say that I need help and support if you lead by example in this way. And so this is a trend, I think that others would back me on this, that we've seen across business, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. I ran a program a couple of weeks ago for graduates, and equally they have this unbelievable amount of permission now as they're internally placed early in their career to ask as many questions as possible, because they're new into the organization. And yet there's still this feeling of, well, I won't put my hand up because I might not be the first then to get promoted because they'll think I'm the neediest in some way. So that was the first thing I've kind of been seeing and wondering, what will it take? What will it take for us to start asking for help when we need to ask for help, and really saying how we feel? And then another conversation I've come across quite a few times, which is also fascinating from, the relationships we have at work, is how much emotion can I show at work? And particularly in these times when it's been quite challenging with COVID, with all of these different pressures and strains. I overheard a conversation with two leaders, and one guy was saying, well, I'll say that I'm a bit concerned, but I won't give them my full-on honest opinion about how worried I am, because I don't want to worry them. And equally, I don't want them to leave work and feel stressed. So it's almost, how do we find that balance between honoring how we feel and leading the people that we lead? And that can be whether you're a leader, that can be at any level of seniority within an organization, but simply saying, actually, I do feel uncomfortable and this is why, or I don't know how to handle this situation, but I'm up for a conversation about it, or I don't know what to say next and I'm okay with that. And it's almost, if I'm working with you and you're one of my colleagues or peers, then that's what I would bring to work. And now that's what I bring to, I try my best to bring that to every conversation that I have, which is, and you'll see this socially as well. A good example of this is if people are in a conversation and then somebody will say, oh, did you hear, that person who did ABC? And a number of people around the group go, oh yeah, I heard about that person. And actually in reality, half the group have never heard of that person and don't get the reference, but we just don't say it. There's kind of a politeness, but there's also when are we just honest to say, I don't know, I don't follow, I need help, I don't understand. And it just, what it means, if you're able to do that and do that a bit more, relationships start to thrive so much more quickly, because A, I know where I stand with you, because I know how you feel and what you're thinking. And B, the one I'm most excited about is, if I'm working with you, it also gives me permission to feel everything that I'm feeling. And that's what I'm noticing from a work relationship perspective. What would it take for us to bring our full selves to say exactly how we feel when we feel it, so that we know who needs the information and when, and who needs the help and when. And I believe it would make for a more supportive environment. And when it happens and I see it work effectively, that is the result.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, and I see all of that and echo everything you said. And importantly, it's about bringing our full selves and being human, like embracing our humanness, isn't it? And when we can be more real and open, it does something quite amazing from a perspective of trust, which I've seen time and time again, where trust opens up. When we allow ourselves to, ask for help if we need it, or, admit we don't have all the answers. No one does. This is the thing. We're all just getting by with the best information we have. But this pretense, or this seeming, it's really destructive in organizations, because it hampers away at the learning culture. And I actually love it when leaders say that they don't know, or anyone, because, you know, no one does know it all. And it's damaging when we think we do, actually. But yeah, trust, you know, trust flourishes in environments where people are real and come to work real, or come to any relationship in a more real, more authentic way, in my experience.
Yeah, I was going to say that it totally applies to every relationship we have. Like thinking around the kind of more personal relationships, whether it's with our kind of our partner or friends or family even, that actually if we can show up in those relationships kind of without the mask, that we're kind of playing this role almost as the perfect girlfriend, the perfect friend, the perfect daughter, whatever it might be, that actually showing that kind of realness and that authenticity, which can feel scary sometimes, but in doing that, it gives the other people in that relationship permission to do the same as well, and that's hugely powerful. And I find that from my own personal experience that those relationships where both I and kind of the other people show up in that way, then there's so much more connection. And like you were saying, Natalie, there's a lot more trust as well. And it's like when you have those conversations that are very kind of superficial and they're the kind of the small talk, versus you kind of showing up with one of your friends and then just going straight into the kind of the deep conversations, that actually being open and vulnerable in that way can be hugely powerful, I think.
And yeah, I mean, I love that. And what was coming to mind as well was the role of a parent, to be able to say, I don't know as well. That's hugely powerful, because as Bea said, that's giving your child the permission then to feel comfortable to say, I don't know as well. And I remember years ago, I can't remember what was going on in my life, but I remember a friend saying to me, oh, do you cry in front of the children? And I said, yeah, of course I do. And she was kind of quite shocked. No, that they need to see I'm strong. And I just didn't agree with that. That for her, that, you know, there is a richness and a courage in vulnerability, in showing up with your feelings and how you're feeling, and to be able to say, I don't know here, or yeah, I'm feeling like this right now. Because the more we kind of hide behind the mask, the more incongruous that feels. We don't feel authentic, and we just get much richer, deeper conversations with that trust when we can show up, fully show up. Brené Brown is, you know, I absolutely adore that woman, and she talks an awful lot about that, the vulnerability. And it's when we can be that person, because it's not weakness, you see, and this is what so many people still think, is that to be vulnerable is weak. Actually, it's the complete opposite. To feel able to just say, this is me. You will, and as the others have said, in a work environment, you're going to, well, for me, I would respect a boss more if they showed up and said, actually, I don't know here. Let's work this out. I can find, you know, let's find out. Or, yeah, actually, I'm not having a great day today. That I would respect them more from that.
It's just interesting, because this is where we spend, you know, whether you work for yourself or not, you spend such a huge chunk of your energy at work. And one of my examples recently with a client was she described a situation that she was facing at work, and I said, oh, that's quite tough. Are there other people, you know, in your organization who've been through something similar that you could talk to and ask them about it, you know, what did they do in a similar situation? And she said, oh, I couldn't do that. What would they think? And it does say more about the organization potentially, but also, you know, what are we doing? If I can't turn to you in my place of work or at any point and say, you have some experience with this, can you give me a view? Or I need some help, can you be here? I just, so this is why we love our work as coaches, but ultimately I hope that, you know, in all of our relationships, that we are open to that point where somebody would feel it's okay for them to share what they need to share with us, and that we would all lead in that way, so that we lead ourselves to be able to say, I don't know, I feel really uncomfortable, this is why. And often I'm asked, you know, well, how do I express anger at work? Or if I'm really frustrated with this person, and how do I say that without appearing emotionally erratic or, you know, out of control? And actually you can simply use the words, I am angry right now and this is why, you know. So it's kind of let it be spoken where possible. And I'm hoping that, yeah, the more that happens, we'll have less of these cases where people are afraid or just worried about the perception of how capable they are in their role, simply because they needed some additional help that they didn't automatically already know. Yeah.
And those stories can be so unhelpful, can't they? Because it's like putting conditions and requirements on love and acceptance and approval, like whether that's I need to appear on top of everything, otherwise it's kind of like ... otherwise people will think that I'm not capable and that I don't deserve that promotion, and we talk a lot about putting the full stop. We can get so carried away with, if I bring my whole self to work, or if I show up as me in this relationship, then all of these things could potentially happen. And it's like we just get so caught up in it.
It's interesting. Sorry, go on.
I think also just like thinking about other expectations that we have in relationships, and these kind of beliefs we have that so often sort of set ourselves and others up for failure in a way. It's like, I need my partner to tell me that they love me 3 times a day, otherwise they don't love me, I'm not lovable and they're a terrible person. Or I need to call my mum this many times a week in order for me to qualify as a good daughter. Or or the work example, I need to act in a certain way in order to be accepted. Or I need to wait 3 days before texting someone, otherwise they'll think I'm desperate. It's all of those kind of unhelpful beliefs and expectations that, again, as I said, they're these kind of arbitrary conditions on love and acceptance. So it's like, what if we ditched those? What if actually we could just show up as ourselves and trust our gut more? Now, I've definitely over time, over the last few years in particular, just trusted my gut a lot more in my relationships, whether that's at work, with my boyfriend, with my friends. It's like, what feels right? What feels right to do? What feels right to say? Rather than getting caught up in the, what will they think if I say what I really think? Because there's that constant fear of judgment, that the fear of rejection, I think, as well. Again, in kind of all scenarios, all relationships. So it's actually like, what if we could get comfortable with going with our gut? And I know that can often feel quite uncomfortable, because we get out of the habit, we kind of override that a lot of the time. But actually, what impact could that have on our relationships if we kind of showed up from that place?
It's interesting, the expectations thing. And I'm thinking back to a podcast I listened to a while ago about somebody who was asking a question about dating, online dating and going out on dates. And And it was so interesting because it's fraught with, you know, landmines, or it can be. And they were saying, it was so interesting, this whole thing about expectations is that, so let's say I'm going out on a date with somebody and I might set an expectation. I'm setting the expectation about how they should behave, what kind of conversations we'll have, when they will phone me or not, or and then I get mad because they haven't lived up to the expectation I set for them. All right. And if you break it down like that, it's insane. But we do it all the time. In you know, as B said about, you know, I could set expectations on how she should be as a daughter, or how I should be, or how my father should behave. And it's crazy when we look at it from that angle. If we can just, you know, it's like people do, you know, I remember I don't know who I was talking to, but it kind of came up in conversation, and it was, I think a client was talking about her husband, and I said, look, he does him. You can't change that. He does him, you do you. And I love that. That sounds very simplistic, but it was like, we can wear ourselves out with the expectations we set for other people. And if we can let go of that and concentrate on the stuff that we can have impact on, and that's within us, then surely that has to make relationships a lot more fun, actually, I would have thought.
And actually, like, what I've found is that as soon as you drop expectations, the things that you used to find really annoying about people kind of become less annoying, because you realize that you were getting annoyed because they were falling short of your ideal picture of how they should be behaving. So it's like, actually, my boss that does this thing that's really annoying, for example, just in case my boss is watching, then actually, like, that's just them, that's just what they do, and actually it doesn't need to mean anything. It doesn't need to grate. Or the way my boyfriend loads the dishwasher.
Tom.
Like, I have an expectation of doing it a certain way, and when he doesn't do that every single time, that's okay. That's one I'm still working on. But and kind of looking at it from that more sort of light-hearted perspective as well can be so helpful, because it does make you realize how mad it is, how many traps we lay and how many games we play that actually the other person is often completely oblivious to them. It's like we tie ourselves in knots and we end up in a massive strop, again, speaking from my own experience, about something that the other person has done that they're completely oblivious to. So like, what's wrong? It's like, but you can't even explain it, because it's like, oh wait, no, that's I'm just kind of getting tangled up in my own stuff.
It's crazy, some of the rules we create and then live to like they're real. And on the expectations, as you were talking, I was really thinking about expectations of ourselves as well, and like our relationship with ourselves, because since I've dropped some of the expectations I held for myself, I have grown so much, because I've been able to kind of just flourish as me, as Natalie, because all the while I was trying to raise the bar on what I thought I should do, what others expected of me, what I expected ought to be the thing to do. I was looking away from actually turning the dial up on me, and yeah, and so it's fascinating, because we think these expectations if we strive towards them, like for ourselves, that we're going to get somewhere. But in my experience, it just was terribly exhausting, and didn't actually result in good stuff at all. But it took for me to see that I was making these expectations up, because it really felt like it was real. But just kind of inquiring, noticing, what am I trying to do? And I wouldn't even congratulate myself on the stuff I got to. I'd just be on to the next and hitting myself when I fell short.
God, I hadn't even realized that either, Nat. So this idea that, having expectations or having high expectations is a good thing. We're told that, you must have high expectations for yourself. And actually, I think it was you, Rebecca, that circulated the quote about my expectations hurt my feelings. It's like, just drop them. How many times in life are we saying, how does this person not understand? How do you not see my point of view? How are you not getting this? Oh, that's right, because it's all unspoken. I haven't said any of it. It's all up here, and you're failing because I'm just setting the bar higher for you and for myself. Amazing. I hadn't realized we are taught to believe that's a good thing, to have these high expectations, and it's just not worth it. So much more fun when they've got away.
Well, the thing is, we fear that we won't be motivated if we don't have them. It's like there's something that we think, well, that's fueling our motivation if we set this high standard. But in my experience, since I've seen what I was making up and letting some of that dissolve and melt away, my motivation hasn't waned. Well, of course, some days I don't feel it, but I'm just as inspired and more inspired by the things that I'm passionate about. And yeah, it's like the expectations is like a filter of fear. We're working through this filter of fear somehow. And when that drops, that's just, that's where the juice is.
I love that filter of fear. That's so cool, isn't it? And it's like, going back to what we spoke about, first of all, the vulnerability and now the expectations. It's like we can begin to shed all of this stuff and then show up. And imagine if we can do that, let go of this stuff that, innocently it looks like it's important, but actually when we can shed some of that stuff and then be us wholeheartedly, that's the gift to the world, isn't it? Rather than a masked version of us. And one of the things that I want to share and talk about is acceptance. And that's acceptance of ourselves as well as others. And I promise I'm not going to sing, but I want to share the lyrics. So, Rach, you could sing. Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. And I don't know when it was that I heard the song on in the background, and then I heard the words. And he says, I'm starting with a man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. And that complete and utter radical acceptance of ourselves. And I recorded a video a little while ago that we were all talking about the other day, and I'll share it in the email tomorrow, because I'd listened to an amazing woman called Tara Brach talking about, and I think she's Buddhist, I'm not sure, but she's a wonderful speaker, and she was talking about radical acceptance. And I just love that word radical in particular, because this is the complete and utter acceptance of ourselves, where we are in this moment. Because we spend so much of our times wishing it were different, wishing we were different, wishing they were different, wishing the job were different, wishing our experience were different. And that just takes us further and further away from the present, but from having a beautiful connection in the moment. Now, what I'm not saying is that acceptance is tolerating stuff. So what I'm not saying is that if you're in a relationship and, you know, there's bad behavior going on, then I'm not saying that you accept that. I'm not saying that you tolerate that, but what happens in the acceptance of, this is where I am right now, this is where we are right now. And when we can fully acknowledge that in the present, then we settle down. And from that space, we know what to do next. But the more we are wishing it were different, we're having a very unreal experience of what's actually happening, because we're in the future or we're looking back into the past. And I just love and I've seen it for myself, and Bea and I talk about this a lot with our clients as well, the acceptance. Yes, I hate where I am right now. You know, if people have got eating disorders, then, but it's, if we can just accept that now is now, what's happening now is happening right now. And from that place, it's like we can build a foundation then to change, to make changes. And it starts with us. So we can drop all of the narrative that we've got about ourselves, about not being good enough, clever enough, pretty enough, young enough, whatever it is. That's just rubbish, right? That's just rubbish that we've been, you know, led to believe. And I don't know what the quote is, but it's something like, if every woman and man could see themselves for who they really are, and appreciate and love themselves for who they really are, so many businesses would go out of business. Those businesses that tell us we're not good enough. So it's about that complete acceptance and appreciation for the moment. And then we can make a move from that. And it's seeing others, accepting others. You know, it's like I said just a moment ago about they do them and you do you. When we can accept that maybe then, you know, somebody isn't behaving as we would like, it's just having that understanding of what's going on for them as well. Sorry, I'm just letting somebody in here.
I love that, Rebecca. And one of the things I think we talked about in our call last week, thinking about this evening, was this idea of changing somebody. And over the years, I've heard many people say, oh, I'll change her, just give me a few years, or I'll change him, just leave it with me. And this idea that, you know, just to fully accept that person wherever they are, wherever they're up to. Again, not tolerate, but accept them, love them as they are. Because when you believe you've changed another person, or you've had an influence over how they now behave or appear to you, you've essentially just given them more effort. You've given them more work to do, because they'll now be paying attention to what they're doing or saying around you. So you've encouraged the masked version of that person. So if I have to work harder to be near you and around you, I won't choose to be near and around you. Whereas everyone on this call actually are people I would just choose to be near and around, because you're accepting us all as we are, and we're accepting of you. And I think my kids, you know, I have expectations for my kids. I just accept them where they are. That's harder some days. I still like gin. But in the main, it's just wonderful to go, I'm annoyed because I have this expectation of this person. And when I believe, or when I want to change something about you or them, I'm simply increasing the amount of stuff you've got to do. And that's not fair. That's not fair to you. It's not right. And also, in most of the cases, I haven't even told you what I'm expecting you to change into. So to drop all of that and to simply show up and have a conversation where I come to this conversation with no expectations of myself or of you. And that is a fun conversation to have, because who knows where that's going to go. That's really a nice space to be in.
And there's also in that as well, this kind of, I'd written it down talking about how when relationships become effortless, and one of those is obviously loving ourselves first. But also when we're in conversation with somebody else is to listen to understand, and not just listening to wait to talk, to get a glimpse into somebody else's, you know, to truly try and understand. And that's acceptance. It's transformative in relationships. But as Michael Jackson says, it starts with us.
Yeah. And I think that, yeah, it does start with us. And I think in all of this, one of the key things we want you to take away is that, you know, that acceptance in your relationship with yourself, you know, the more that gets real and you come from a place of presence and acceptance, then, you know, it has a ripple effect to all other interactions, no matter who with. I've got a couple of things that I wanted to share that have helped me and my relationships. While I do that, Rebecca, perhaps you could open the chat.
Oh, yes.
So if anyone has any questions that have sparked while we've been talking, please feel free to write them in the chat while I talk. So the first thing I wanted to share is the notion of separate realities, which sounds a bit strange. It sounds like parallel universes or something, but let me explain what I mean by this. So we all live in our own unique reality, given the thinking we have in any moment in relation to whatever it is we're facing, the person we're with, or the situation we find ourselves in. And that version that we're experiencing, our unique perspective, is brought to life through our thinking, and our thinking is absolutely unique. But in moments when we're interacting with others, we can innocently imagine that they're seeing the same thing. And then we can have conflict when people don't see it the same way as us. And the reality is they never will. No two people will ever see any situation in an identical way, because we come to life, we come to this moment, and we come to it with our unique experiences, beliefs, ideas, thoughts, which we might not even be aware of in our commentary. They're just part of the tapestry of our personality. And also in that moment, we bring our state of mind that we have in any given moment, which also we can either be seeing clearly and our experience is, I guess, less contaminated, for a better word, because we can see what's happening and we're not necessarily seeing through anger or fear. Or in a moment we can be in a lower mood, and from that place things will look differently. So we're always living in a unique reality to us. And when we come to relationships and we assume the other person's seeing it from the same perspective, that's immediately going to be problematic, because they never will. So now in my relationships, I kind of expect people to see it differently to the way I do. And it wasn't always like that. I think, you know, in the back of my mind, I probably imagined, you know, there would be more similarity, but invariably there just isn't. And then this piece around the state of mind that we bring to our interactions, that is huge. Seeing the role the quality of our thinking has in any given moment has been massive for me, because I think and I still lose it frequently, but you know, when we are in a you know, when we're angry or irritated or frustrated, then we see the world in, you know, through that lens. So one moment someone can look really irritating to you, and from a different state of mind, that whatever they're doing will look endearing. So the loading the dishwasher be, you know, I'm sure some days that will, you know, that and yeah, it happens in our household too. You know, some days I'll get that and it's just like so, you know, not loaded in the way I would do it. And some days like that really grates, and some days it doesn't. Same dishwasher, same hopeless loading of dishwasher, but a completely different state of mind. So during our 4-week program, I got out this sand jar quite a lot, which is basically, we've got sand at the bottom and clear water. And our natural state when we're in a clear state of mind is clarity. And from that place, we can see what's in front of us, and it's not distorted or contaminated. We can, you know, and from that place, it's like when Rebecca was talking about our presence. If we come and we are from a place of acceptance, then we're more inclined, because we're not resisting, we're more inclined to see things with a little bit more clarity, and we have space for fresh thinking and fresh ideas. But once I get kind of angry and irritated, and that's all okay as well, because we do, you can see it all gets a bit shook up and we lose our sense of clarity because we're in that kind of murky territory. So whatever's happening outside of us can look very different given our state of mind. So from a higher quality of state of mind, when we'll be able to step back and see a bigger picture, we'll have space for fresh thinking, and probably we'll come into our interactions with more calm, more common sense, more emotional intelligence. But when our state of mind drops, if we get angry or irritated, then, you know, it's really easy to go into reactive mode. It's really easy to speak out in anger or frustration. And sometimes from that place, we will, you know, we'll say things, and I do it, you know, I say things I don't mean, you know, but that happens more from a place of a lower quality of thinking when our state of mind has dropped. So really what the four of us always help people to try and do is just save some awareness for our state of mind in the moment. You know, your emotions, your mood, they're an amazing barometer for the quality of your thinking. And just know that given your quality of thinking, you'll come to interactions in a different way. And if you're feeling in a bit of a low mood, you know, I think historically, you know, if I was feeling angry, I would probably kind of have it out. But what's going to come out of my mouth is going to look very different from this place to coming from things with a clearer head. So save some room, I suppose, is what I want to say for an awareness of your state of mind, because in my experience, noticing that more and more has been huge in, you know, in my understanding of relationships and seeing that in others, you know. And if I see that my husband is in this place, well, you know, I kind of know I'm not going to get the best interaction from that place. So I'll just kind of give him some space. Ladies?
You know what, I love that. And one of the things that Bea and I talk about a lot is people's so somebody with an eating disorder, their relationship with the eating disorder. And it's almost like two separate things. There's them and then there's the eating disorder. And we often talk about, you don't have to get into the boxing ring with it every time. So it's like there is, you know, and that could be from the shaken up place that Natalie was just saying. It's like Andy might be saying, you know, come on, you know, I'm trying to pick a fight, and you can choose not to get into the boxing ring. And that becomes more evident when we become more aware of our state of mind and the role that plays in our interactions and in our relationships. Because, you know, one person in a boxing ring, there's no fighting going on. And then when we settle back down again, or allow the other person's space to settle down, then it might not even be a thing. And what a relief that is. Because I know how many times I've spouted off about stuff. And then, you know, when you've started, you can't stop. And it never ends well from that reactive place. And this is not about being passive. This is absolutely not about being passive, but this is around the quality of the interaction. Because when two people are in a low state of mind, it's never going to be productive. But when you can have a conversation up here, that's a very different thing. You can have the toughest conversations up there with ease.
And it can so easy, it can be so easy to kind of get sucked into that argument or heated discussion or whatever it might be, because I think we so often go into defense mode and feel like we need to justify, which is totally natural, and we all do it because we want to be able to defend ourselves. So actually kind of resisting that temptation or that knee-jerk reaction to do that, that actually we can see that the other person is in a bit of a shaken up state. Maybe don't say that to their face. They might punch you. Oh, you're really shaken up right now. But actually just kind of waiting for that to pass and finding another moment to have that conversation, or again noticing it in yourself, that actually when you do kind of feel like you're bubbling up, that actually thinking that actually maybe I'll kind of wait for that to settle and then bring it up again. Because making decisions as well in that shaken up state is never a good idea. We always feel like the answer comes from thinking it through, but actually so often it's the opposite. It's why we always say to sleep on it. That actually that's when we're not thinking. So actually when we're making decisions in our relationships, and actually when we're in that state, that kind of agitated, shaken up state, then that's not the moment to make those decisions.
Yeah. And it might be that what you thought in that shaken up state, from a clear set of thinking, it still feels, I've got more perspective now, and that decision you were thinking you needed to make, I'm going to go with that. But from that agitated state, we're in catastrophic thinking at that stage. So everything looks urgent. So we feel we need to change what's outside of us. But sometimes just settling and seeing something from a different perspective is all that needs to happen. And I think we're, when we get into positions of conflict, it's really easy to absolutely fixate on what's happening outside or the other person. But invariably we will have a different perspective and a different thought on things, or new thinking will come, because that's the nature of thought. It's not fixed, it moves and it flows, as does our state of mind.
This idea of don't go to bed with a frown, actually 10 minutes later when you're asleep, you're not frowning anymore, and it's probably the most sensible thing to do if you're in the middle of an argument with somebody. It's like, just don't address it while you're shook up. Nearly sang then. I'd love to pick up Mark's comment here, because I think you'll all have something to say on this as well. So appreciation for the lyrics and the song, but interesting for Mark and for us that people often look outside of themselves to other people to be their source of happiness, joy, and we know that. So again in relationship, I'll be building expectations that this person can give to me the happiness I've waited for, or I'll be happy when I'm in this type of relationship or with this type of career, car, whatever it is. And I was just reflecting on how, the more we engage in this radical acceptance of self that Rebecca talked about, just as soon as you accept where you are, who you are, how you are, All of those, I found anyway, all of those expectations or looking outside for sources of happiness just very much melt away. Very, very much. I don't know what the others have found on that.
Absolutely. And when you think about, there's a whole pop industry on songs about "You Complete Me" and "The Missing Puzzle of the Jigsaw," or anything by Adele, which makes you cry because the other person did something to you, and yeah. If you saw what was really going on, as Marcus said, nobody can make me happy. Mm-hmm. Only I can do that. And there is no missing puzzle piece in my life that I'm waiting for somebody to fill. And that's a relief, because I spent way too many years, after my marriage ended, looking outside of me for approval, for somebody to love me, for me to feel lovable, and put way too much pressure on this poor guy. Didn't know what hit him really, when I should have been looking inside, and I'd forgotten that. And then when that relationship with myself is whole, then everything's different in every interaction, every relationship, because I'm not looking for somebody to fill a void in me. And that could be in friendships as well, or even with family members.
And interesting, once you have that belief, so this person will provide happiness to me, I'm then also living in fear that what happens when I lose that person. So then you live in fear the whole time. So without this money, I won't be secure. So I fear losing the money. So I won't spend the money. I'll sit on the money. Without this relationship, I won't be okay. So I'll cling to the person, become overly attached to the person, make the other person claustrophobic almost, because I don't want to lose the person. And actually, it's all got to happen internally. Easier said than done, but the more I think we recognize and accept, and may I say it on a talk on thriving relationships, love ourselves, it's quite incredible that I don't need the external source ever, and that I will forever come from a place of safety, freedom, security, whether I have the money or not. And that's huge. That's just huge.
I think also that's not to say that we can't kind of get joy from being with other people, or being around other people, or friends or family or whoever it might be. But I think it's that element of dependence, and also the idea that we need someone to complete us, again, whether that's romantically or in friendships, or even in work, like a kind of a business partner, for example. That it implies that we aren't whole, and that we're not enough by ourselves. We're not capable to be human beings by ourselves. So I think, I absolutely love the relationship I'm in with my boyfriend, but I don't rely on that to make me happy. And I think there's kind of a subtle difference.
Yeah. And equally, if you're relying on someone's emotional, how they show up to dictate how you feel, it's just all such rocky foundations, isn't it? Because as I said, with what I said about that piece around clarity, your partner or the other person's, their clarity is ebbing and flowing and ebbing, as we all do. And there's been a huge piece for me about just taking that less personally, because that's their stuff. I'm not in control of that. Because I think previously I would have maybe, you know, taken things personally if someone was in a low mood, or, you know, and it's just not about me. It's entirely about their state of mind in the moment, and that will change. So kind of permission to lose our, you know, attachment and taking that personally. It's great if we can take other people's emotional roller coasters less seriously.
Yeah.
I also love Helen's comment about how having more awareness of her own levels of anxiety and how they kind of feed her reactions, that's been kind of a huge learning curve. So actually seeing what's actually causing us to feel anxious, agitated, argumentative, that actually it's not the other person, it's our state of mind in that moment. It's the shaken up sand jar that's causing us to feel those things.
And the awareness to know that Helen won't act necessarily in that moment if she's feeling a particular, you know, high level of anxiety, for example. It's great awareness.
I love that, Jessica. Everyone has a should manual, which is all about what you think should happen in a situation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, God, we have so many shoulds, and it's something we've talked about in a number of our other talks.
Yeah.
That actually those shoulds are just stories, unhelpful stories.
Yeah.
So actually, what would life look like if we took those away?
I was just reading in Glennon Doyle's Untamed earlier, and she talks about the shoulds and the oughts and the musts as being part of our programming. It's not, you know, and I just love that was something that was kind of that we've picked up along the way. All those shoulds. I should behave like this, and they don't belong to us, and we can let those ones go. For all of us. I'm very aware that we're just at the top of the hour almost. Where did that go? We could talk for another hour, I know. But we won't, don't worry.
Not today.
No. So, oh gosh, what a rich conversation. And I so hope you've all taken something from this, from the Rachel talking about starting us off with vulnerability and authenticity and the difference that can have in our lives when we show up from that place, and the expectations in relationships and of ourselves that Bea spoke about. And then this notion of radical acceptance of ourselves, that's had a profound impact on my life. Just letting go of so many of those stories. And then Natalie talking about our separate realities and our state of mind, and that's kind of key, really. I mean, there's so much richness in all of that we've shared. And fundamentally, you know, the most important relationship that we ever have in our lives is that the one that we have with ourselves. And when we can truly, and this isn't standing in front of the mirror going, you know, morning tiger, that's the superficial stuff. You can do it if you like. but it's that deep acceptance and love for ourselves. And once we can see that and have that, all our relationships thrive as a result of that, whether that's in work, with our intimate relationships, with our friends, colleagues, whatever. And it does start with that relationship that we have with ourselves. So that's it really from us for this evening. We have been, we're excited that as a result of our 4-week program, the Deep Dive into Stress, Anxiety and Overwhelm, that we are now putting together an online self-study program. We don't have a date yet. We've got so much content that we want to pull together. But that's the next thing, because we just felt it was such a rich course that we ran that let's get it out to everyone. So I just want to say thank you for showing up this evening and listening and commenting and asking questions. It's been an absolute pleasure as always, and we feel very privileged that you tune in to listen to us chatting, really. Feels great.
Feels great to share.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm just going to stop recording.